In today's video, we're going to talk about some of the major problems with youth baseball and softball tournaments. If you don't know me, I'm Dan Blue. I'm a former pro pitcher. I also own my own baseball and softball academy, and we had our own teams. And so we traveled around. I've been to all these tournaments. I've signed up for them. I've dealt with the owners. I've dealt with all the rules and all this nonsense and the fees. And there's a lot of things to be frustrated about. So let's talk about it. And first, before we get going, I want to implore you, if you want to see changes, you have to organize. That means a couple things. Number one, email your organization. Tell them that you want to see change, and do so with a bunch of other parents CC'd. Get together and be like, hey, let's email our organization and let's tell them that we want to stay more local. We don't want to travel as much, or we don't want to go to tournaments that charge, gate fees or this or that. I know most charge gate fees, which we'll talk about. That's number one. Number two is speak up on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, wherever. Talk about this. Talk about how you're fed up and you want to do something about it. The more you can get people collectively putting pressure on organizations and tournaments where they start to realize they can't charge what they're charging, or people don't like this format, or people don't want to travel as much, things will change. But if you don't speak up, it will not change. Get parents together, rally people, organize to play more local baseball where you can control the experience, not charge stupid gate fees, not spend your weekend in expensive hotels that, they scrape a commission off of. You can change this if you organize and make your voice heard. All right, so the first big problem with youth baseball and softball tournaments is this forced hotel situation. It absolutely sucks. I know the tournaments, they make a commission off these or whatever it is, and they force you to do it, or else there's like $1,000 buyout to buy out of it. In a lot of situations, yes, the $1,000, if the parents were to take on this fee themselves for a given tournament, it seems like a lot of money, but in the end, if you're to spend 2 nights in the hotel and say you get a hotel $50 cheaper per night, that's $100 savings per family, times 15 families, that's $1,500. That's cheaper than the buyout fee. Or say you could get an Airbnb, and it's way cheaper for your family. Plus you can save on meals. You don't have to eat out because you have a kitchen. It can really be a good overall savings, but it just sucks that you have to buy out staying in a certain hotel. It's like tournament companies, they're so predatory. They're trying to scrape every last penny out of your wallet. And this is, again, another situation where organizations need to push back and say, hey, we're not going to play in this tournament if we're forced to stay in your dumb hotels. Our families need to be in Airbnbs where they can cook, or they need to be in an area that's better populated or just less expensive. We need to save money as sports families. This needs to be better. The second big problem with youth sports tournaments, and it's not just sports, it's also my niece is 4 years old. One of my nieces, she did dance, and the recital for people who weren't her parents, the recital fee to go watch her twirl around on stage was $25. I live in DC. The Kennedy Center is somewhere over there. I could pay $25 to see real ballerinas or a real world-class musician for $25. And I'm forced to pay to watch 4-year-olds for $25. It's ridiculous. And for you as sports families, you have to pay to watch your kid play in a tournament that you paid for. It is the most ridiculous thing. Honestly, I think local legislators should make this illegal. It's just such a predatory fee. How can you charge people to pay to watch something they already paid for? Make your voice heard. Email the tournament and tell them how awful of a policy this is. Now, they're not going to change it because they make an ungodly amount of money. There are some companies like Big Show in Pennsylvania, they don't charge gate fees. And I talked to them about it, and they're like, we leave a lot of money on the table, but we think it's the right thing to do. And so if there is a tournament company that doesn't charge gate fees, patronize them. That should be the model. And if these companies are feeling the squeeze where they're losing registrations and not filling out tournaments anymore because of gate fees, then maybe things will change. But there are some companies, again, Big Show in Pennsylvania, I have no financial affiliation with them, but I've been at their tournaments and they don't charge a fee. So it's not everywhere. It's most places because they make an exorbitant amount of money, again, scraping more money out of your parents' pockets. Third big problem of youth sports tournaments, Wednesday and Thursday games. How are working parents supposed to do this? You're supposed to take off, 3 days of work now? It's getting ridiculous. And this is the big thing that's straining families. I mean, there's so many things straining sports families, but now you've got to use all your paid time off to take your kids to some dumb tournament in Indiana or wherever. It just doesn't make sense. And it's just these companies being greedy, trying to pack in more teams and fill out more unused field time. Because it's easy to get field time on a Wednesday because There's no competition for like, rec softball or, adult league games or whatever. So they just want to fill them out. And it's really, really difficult. It strains families, marriages, all this stuff. It needs to change. The next problem with youth sports tournaments is just the sheer amount of games, especially in baseball, softball, especially in baseball. Like, there were times for me as a coach where I just like kind of hoped we would lose on Saturday night or like the first game on Sunday. I never want to lose, but it's like I'm completely out of pitching. And I'm not going to like throw the kid who threw 4 innings on Friday on Sunday just to win a stupid tournament that we don't ultimately care about. That could potentially change that kid's life if it ends up wrecking their arm or being another nick out of their UCL where eventually they get Tommy John because they were overused so many times. I refuse to overuse kids, but how do you get through 6 games in 3 days or 7 games in 3 days? You just can't. You can't have enough pitching for that. And so they just need to be capped. And it's a problem where you start to feel conflicted of, do I take care of my players' health? It shouldn't be an issue. Next one, time limits. This is a major problem in baseball, more so than softball because softball games go faster, but too many baseball games now because almost everything is played in this tournament format, and maybe it's 2-hour time limit, or maybe it's an hour 45, or maybe it's an hour 40, and the games are getting cut short in the 5th inning. Kids aren't learning how to pitch, with the winning run on third anymore. They're not learning how to hit when they're the final out of the game. They're not learning how to push a run across, be in that pressure-packed situation where they're winning the runs on second, and both teams are squeezed and feel the pressure. That is so good for players and for kids generally, to feel the pressure, to work through these emotionally stressful situations. That's one of the great things about sports. Pitching in the bases loaded situation in the last inning prepares you for real life. And so the output is that we have a bunch of kids that don't know how to compete in the last inning. They don't know how to compete when the pressure is on. They don't learn what they're made of. And it's just a really big shame. Not to mention the time limits really change how pitchers are used, how players are subbed in, the development time that different players get, like who can get some innings and here and there. Like, it's a really big problem, the time limits in general. Like, baseball is not a time limit sport. It does not lend itself well to that. And unfortunately, it's like more common than not in the travel baseball scene. And I don't see a way that it's going away because they're trying to pack so many games in these tournaments. And especially if there's any weather whatsoever, you get a rain shower on Friday night that cancels a bunch of games. Now they got to pack more in, and maybe they shave time off the time limit. So it's just a major problem. And unfortunately, I don't see a way that it's going to change. Next, the greatly exaggerated claims of college exposure at these tournaments. First of all, the overwhelming majority of freshmen and sophomores in high school are just not ready to be recruited. So it doesn't matter if there's college scouts at these games. They're not going to be looking at your kid. Your kid's just not going to be physically big and strong enough yet. It's a very tiny sliver of players who are like legitimately ready to be scouted as a freshman or sophomore. And those are the kids that are like, they already look like they're 18 when they're 15, basically. So for most players, it doesn't matter at all whether there are scouts there or not. But most tournaments will just flat out lie. They say, oh, it's college recruiting event. Well, and then you learn that it's only at 17U that any scouts show up at all, which is typical in general. Unless it's like the very top, like most exclusive tournaments, and there are some really good exposure tournaments out there, but they're really like the most exclusive ones that your team is probably not going to get into. At most of them, the scouts only come at 17U games because that's when most kids are ready to be scouted and it's not a waste of their time. And most of them, they can't even talk. Like, the new rules have changed where they can't even talk to kids when they're 16 anymore. So most of these claims in general of like, there's going to be, it's a college exposure tournament. Most of the time, there just aren't scouts there. So the fact that they call it that, or they call it a recruiting event, is just a flat out lie. Other times there are scouts there. Not all tournaments lie about this, but even when there are scouts there, usually it's not relevant to your kid yet. Again, freshman and sophomore year for the vast majority of players. Overall, this language of you need to attend these tournaments to get exposure, it's just predatory and it's not useful to parents. Most of these tournaments, you won't get any actual college exposure at, and most of these tournaments won't be played at a time when your kid is ready for the exposure. So you'll go to tournaments, 13U, 14U, 15U, 16U, and almost all those years for almost every player, they don't need recruiting exposure at all because they're not good enough to be recruited yet. It's far and away just a sales tactic. It's the fear of missing out, the fear that your kid is going to get left behind, the fear that your kid isn't going to get to experience this big dream if you don't go to that special 13U tournament. Next, the tiebreaker rules that determine which teams leave pool play to go into the bracket play. So most tournaments, you get a couple pool play games, like there's, A pool, B pool, C pool, D pool, E, blah, whatever. And there's like 4 teams in it. You play each other. And then depending on like the top teams or top 2 teams move on to the bracket. That's typically how it works. Unfortunately, there's a lot of times where like 2 teams or 3 teams are like have the same record in your pool, and they have to do tiebreakers using either runs allowed or run differential or some other metrics. And most of these, they just change the way the game is played. I did a full video about run differential. I'll link to below. But it's a big problem because it incentivizes teams to run up the score. It incentivizes teams to leave their best pitchers in longer to reduce their runs allowed and to not sub in their lesser players because they don't want to, little Johnny who should get some time at third base but makes more errors. They don't want to put him in because if they allow more runs because he's not their best player at third base, if he makes a mistake and allows a run, that hurts their chances of moving on. It's really important developmentally that there are winning games and losing games. There are big wins and big losses. In big wins and big losses, the lesser players should go in to get more innings. That's when you pitch your worst pitchers, when you're winning or losing by a lot, because they can't affect the outcome of the game as much if they don't pitch as well. That's a good time to get lesser players their inning. But most of these tournament tiebreakers completely de-incentivize teams from putting out their second tier players. And then it's just this massive problem where you have to leave your A squad in there when you're already up 9-1 in the 5th because you want to definitely make sure you make it to the bracket. And it's just such a shame. There is a balance in baseball, in all sports, of getting the lesser players their playing time when the game is not on the line. It's important. And unfortunately, the tournaments are ruining that. And lastly, and there's other topics I could talk about, but lastly, why are we obsessed with tournaments? It's just not that interesting. It's just stupid. I grew up playing Baltimore Metro baseball. If you know anything about the East Coast, the Metro area, the Metro League was the best youth baseball league in Baltimore for like quite a long time. And it was conferences. Like there was like 2 conferences in the 15U league, or I think it was actually 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. It might have been 2 age groups. It wasn't one 15U or just 14U. But anyway, it was like 8 teams, maybe 2 divisions, maybe 12 teams, 2 6-team divisions, whatever. But you just played each other just like you do in the major leagues or you do in the SEC. You play the teams in your league. So we drove all around the Baltimore Metro area to play. I played on the Yankee Rebels. There was the Maryland Orioles. There were the Cecil Johnnies. There were the, whatever. We just toured the Baltimore area, so everything was within like 45-minute drive, and we just played the other teams, and they were all very good. And it was competitive, hard-nosed baseball. And if you won the Baltimore Metro League, if you came in first place, you got to go to the Triple ABC World Series or something in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. We never won that, so we never played a tournament. I never played a tournament as a kid. And I was a very good baseball player, and I loved playing baseball. And my family wasn't taxed by driving us all over the country to play games against another set of 15-year-olds. Like, it doesn't matter what the name of the team is. Like, why do we need to go play the Lexington whoever's? Let's just play another random group of 15-year-olds an hour away instead of 10 hours away. The tournament format that we're obsessed with, it's just, why? Why are we doing it? No one knows. No one really knows. It just became this exciting thing a long time ago, and there was like, well, we want to play in tournaments too, and then here we are. Everything is a tournament. What we need to do is organize, make your voices heard, band local teams together, and just play each other. If you're in the DC area, there's 1 million teams in DC, Maryland, Virginia, in the DMV. Play each other. Hire some umpires, get a field permit, play each other. To stop driving to Arkansas. Just play each other in the DMV. There's some amazing talent here. You're in Georgia, play Georgia teams. This is what we need to do. This is the way to stop giving money to these corrupt companies that are just doing predatory things to steal money from you. Play each other locally, pay the umpires well, rake the field yourself. Enjoy playing 30 minutes down the road, get home and have a picnic in your backyard. That's the American sports dream, and that's what I hope we can all start moving back to. And I know there are gears turning, and that's why I wanted to make this video, because I know a lot of you, including myself, are disgruntled about the experience. Take it back, organize, get people talking, and maybe we can together make youth sports better.